Good morning and welcome to our KTI Unlocking Knowledge Transfer webinar this morning. Really delighted to welcome you back to our November webinar where we're turning our attention to the marine sector. So this webinar series has been designed to really shine a spotlight on R&D activity happening in Ireland and specifically looking at knowledge transfer from the Irish universities and institutes of technology. So really delighted to have two very innovative companies with us this morning. So we have Tomás Flangan, CEO of ÉireComposites, based in Galway. And we also have Jimmy Murphy, lead of the National Ocean Test Facility in the SFI-funded MaREI facility down in Cork as well. So I'm doing a little tour around the country. We have John Murphy, CEO of 8 West Consulting, also based in Cork. And then we're moving up to Clare to Liam Curran, Senior Technologist at Enterprise Ireland. So over the course of this morning, we're going to hear about the innovations happening in 8 West Consulting and also in ÉireComposites. And we'll hear about the supports available through Enterprise Ireland and through the Marine Ireland Industry Network. And we'll also hear about how you can access supports in the research system through MaREI. So our moderator for our discussion this morning is Vincent Mull, Business Editor at News Talk. Feel free to submit your questions at any time throughout the webinar and we'll deal with them as they come up. And also just to let you know that this webinar is being recorded and you can listen back to it at any time. So with that, I'm going to pass over to Vincent to start our discussion this morning.
Thanks a minute, Siobhan, and good morning, everybody, and good morning to our 4 panelists. Looking forward to our chat over the next half hour, 40 minutes or so. And as Siobhan said, please send your question into us and we'll get them to the panelists in terms of where you want them to go. Liam Curran of Enterprise Ireland, we might start with you. We all know we're an island nation, but we haven't always best exploited the opportunities and potential that the seas around our coasts present and offer. But in terms of the types of sectors now where we are beginning to see innovation and research and activity, can you give us a flavour of what they are?
Sure, Vincent. Yeah, and good morning, everybody. Great to be here, and thanks for the opportunity. Yeah, so I suppose Liam Curran from Enterprise Ireland. I'm a senior technologist with Enterprise Ireland. I cover off the marine sector and kind of activity in that area. I suppose just very initial kind of comment, if people want to keep up to date with what's happening in that sector, do, as Siobhan said, do log into Marine Ireland Industry Network, and everything that's happening in the sector is kind of up there in our news section. We do some case studies, we do events and so on. So do have a look there and it'll keep you up to date with what's happening in the broader marine sector in Ireland. I suppose then coming to specific subsectors of marine where there are opportunities, and the area we're focused heavily on at the moment is around marine renewables and in particular offshore wind. And there's a couple of elements to that. It's of critical importance to Ireland itself and the decarbonisation of its energy supply system. But in addition, there are huge opportunities for companies with the right skill sets and capabilities there. We're working with 60 plus companies in that space who have a specific offering for offshore wind. There's opportunities in the UK industry in the short term. Lots of survey work happening around Ireland as well at the moment. So companies with skill sets around surveys, survey capability, seabed mapping, wind resource assessment, wave energy assessment, all those areas, those are companies that are actively engaged in Ireland at the moment. I suppose kind of something that dovetails with that is the emerging area of green hydrogen and how green hydrogen will integrate with offshore wind and indeed onshore wind and solar and other forms of renewable. And green hydrogen is a really interesting area in terms of how it dovetails neatly with those renewable sectors and how it can contribute to decarbonisation of our energy system. So it's really something we need to kind of start to work on nationally and particularly at R&D level. And MaREI and people like that would be NUIG and DCU are all centres that are looking at green hydrogen and how it might fit with offshore renewables and indeed onshore.
Green hydrogen, Liam, being hydrogen that the electrolysis process that that separates the hydrogen comes from renewable power sources.
Exactly. So you can produce hydrogen at the moment, Vincent, but you're going to have a significant carbon emission associated with that. The only way you can really produce it and classify it as green is by, like you say, producing it using an electrolyzer, and the electricity for that electrolyzer comes from renewable resources. And there are ways that being clever about this where we can produce it using surplus, if you like, renewable electricity. And Jimmy would be, and other people at MaREI would be working on key elements of that. One of the other areas, I suppose, of real interest is the marinization, which is a bit of a clunky word, but it's the marinization of our ICT and IoT and comms and so on capability. So there's a real need in the marine sector for that kind of capability.
What do you mean by that?
So what I mean by that is, if you think about it, Vincent, if you deploy floating offshore wind off the west coast of Ireland, you're going to have difficulty accessing those platforms, because for a high proportion of the time, the seas out there are going to be so rough that you won't be able to readily get onto those platforms, do maintenance work and so on. So what you want to be able to do is to be able to remotely condition monitor those systems. You want to be able to watch them in real time. You want to be able to assess things like vibration in the main shaft or the heat of a gearbox, oil, or so on, so that you're looking for problems before they become catastrophic failures. And in order to be able to do that, you've got to have that connectivity. You've got to have the comms piece. You've got to have IoT. You've got to have data acquisition and analysis. You've got to have overall that you've got to have cybersecurity. So Ireland has real strengths in those kind of key areas. And, there's an opportunity there for those companies with those skills to bring them to the marine sector. Another area I think of real interest and emerging interest, particularly for regional development, is a whole area of marine bioeconomy. So taking basically biological materials from the sea and getting the greatest possible value from those materials. So we have people beginning to culture particular forms of seaweed, process those and add them to animal feed with a view to reducing greenhouse gas emissions from cattle in the agricultural sector. And we all know this is it's going to be a key element in terms of Ireland's greenhouse gas emissions going forward. So there's early stage work on that, and people like Shannon ABC would be key research capability looking at those kind of areas. So we also are looking at things like the valorization of processing waste from the fish processing industry. So basically you want to get the greatest possible yield from a fish when you put it through the processing system. You don't want to discard anything. So there's work around how can we get the greatest maximum possible yield from that fish. And companies like Biomarine Ingredients up in Monaghan, they would be extracting high-end lipid and protein compounds from blue whiting from the Killybegs fleet. Now, blue whiting aren't a particularly valuable species in the great scheme of things, but here is a really smart use of that resource in terms of yield.
Okay, thanks for that very comprehensive flavor of the types of things that are going on, different sectors, the different types of research, innovation and production indeed that are going on, Liam. We'll be back to you in just a moment, but I was going to come to Tomás first, but I actually might just skip Tomás. I'll be back to you in a moment, because I thought Liam talking there about the communication side of things, and in terms of perhaps the potential and the need to communicate with our offshore wind turbines, particularly in the Atlantic. And John Murphy at 8 West, you're a software service provider generally to a whole range of sectors, but you have developed such a communications device for marine search and rescue.
Yeah, we have. We've been in the maritime space now for a good couple of years, 5 or 6 years. With a smartphone product which is used by, you could say, occasional fishermen in the leisure industry. There's probably in the region of 400, 500,000 people who've downloaded the application around the world, but we don't sell it to individuals. We sold it to the national authorities, so the coast guards of individual countries or organizations like the Dubai Police or the Royal Danish Navy, or the Dutch Coast Guard. So there's about a dozen countries that are using it as a national system. So, you know, as a software company, we're about 220 software engineers within a company based in Cork. And we work across, like you say, a whole bunch of different sectors. And as part of a kind of a professional services sector, we viewed this as an interesting diversification from what we're doing, getting into the product development and getting into the marine sector as well. So I have a bit of kind of a history of myself in that sector. We worked with fantastic partners such as the Irish Coast Guard back in the day, in the early days when we got the idea. Then we networked with the Spanish Coast Guard, the Dutch Coast Guard, and everybody was looking for a particular solution around essentially moving it to where it is right now, where we've just launched our wearable IoT platform for individuals and launched that in the Dutch market. So there are new telecommunications standards and technologies that are being rolled out around the world. Ireland is adopting those. It's not at the, for example, there's narrowband IoT, which could really fit what Liam is talking about there, moving out to looking at monitoring platforms offshore. These are long-range cellular type technologies. You've also kind of got kind of low-power wireless area networks as well, like LoRa and Sigfox. But with them, you kind of lack some of the service level quality that you get with a cellular network. So with narrowband IoT and LTE-M, which is a technology that we're using, you get really long battery life, very long range, radio range, and an ability to work down to very poor signal strength as well. So these new kind of technologies allow you to kind of rethink what your solutions would be for wearable IoT and sensor-based IoT. So we've worked with Sony, who've released a wearable IoT system, which actually looks like a watch, and we built an entire platform around that. And this system called SafeTrax Active is now available in certain countries. We've sold our first commercial use, which is actually an organization called North Sea Farmers, who are farming seaweed 12 kilometers out into the North Sea, and their workers are using these wearable devices so that they can be tracked from their home office in The Hague. Wow. As well as being able to get biometric information. There's a push button where it's directly integrated into the Dutch Coast Guard base in Den Helder. So yeah, these new wireless technologies, these long-range wireless technologies will allow us to monitor any devices or appliances that we're putting offshore. The traditional way of doing this is using satellite, and satellite tends to be quite expensive. So we're getting ranges of 20 to 25 kilometer in the North Sea with our technology. So it's suitable for near-shore IoT infrastructure.
Okay, thanks for taking us through that, John, and we'll be back to you in a few moments. That's a software health and safety, I suppose, a safety and rescue product. But Tomás Flangan up at ÉireComposites in Galway, you're producing a whole range of materials, resilient, tough materials using composite materials for a whole range of sectors as well. But you're also producing turbines and foils for the marine sector.
Yeah, absolutely. So going back to some of what Liam said, there's a challenge in making devices that are suitable for offshore applications, and particularly into the Atlantic, where we've got very high winds. So we make things out of composites. We make parts for airplanes and even some parts for satellites. But they're relevant to today's call. It's wind energy devices for floating wind, for onshore wind as well, and then tidal and wave devices. So we're involved in a number of European funded projects, and some that are funded by Enterprise Ireland. And there is some really interesting stuff going on. There's a Dutch company called Ampex Power who are about to start testing kites in Millau for kites that are tethered to generators and generate electricity. They're almost like small airplanes, and that would be intended for offshore applications. There is also some work going on in wave devices and tidal devices.
What would they actually do?
If you can imagine a small airplane that's got it's tethered onto a cylinder on the ground, and as the airplane gets caught and the wind flies away, it makes the cylinder spin around. It's connected up to a generator. Generates electricity. Yeah. So we're doing some of the testing in their materials just to show it'll work and to try and make it lighter to make it better. We're involved in 2 floating wind research projects from Horizon 2020, and they're really looking at reducing the cost. And I think floating wind is a very interesting area that probably warrants more thought and new ideas and new technologies. Possibly some of what John's talking about with the communications and the condition monitoring, but also traditional wind companies they've got the normal model of a 3-bladed turbine, and they're trying to put that onto a big floating structure, and that might not be the best way to do it. Some people are looking at 2-bladed models as well, which might give better access. And just the size of these things, people are talking about. We've been approached by one company that's asked us about making 60-meter blades, which is very, very big for us, and we need to think about whether that makes any sense at all. But yeah, but like they actually want 100-meter blades eventually. The 60 meters are kind of a 6-megawatt device, and the financial side of it is colossal as well. You're talking about farms that are at least 100 megawatts, but probably sort of 300, 400, 500 megawatts. So I think in the next phase is offshore wind, but fixed bottom platforms. So they're both to the bottom of the sea, like a bridge. But there will be, in the future, I'd say 5 to 10 years, there'll be a lot of floating wind, and there's a huge opportunity for Ireland if we can get it. But it's really big, and then it's trying to figure out how as an SME we fit into that. And then there's also tidal, and just really quickly on that. Wind is great, and wind is dominant. I guess wind and solar are the 2 big renewables. But tidal energy is predictable. You can predict it out for 1,000 years, and there needs to be some kind of renewable source of energy that will balance the grid, because the wind isn't there some of the time and solar isn't there. So having something that can make up a bit of that that's still renewable, it could be tidal, so either river devices or ocean current devices, and similar with wave. And there's a lot of good work going on in wave. We've got one project is kind of linked up to ports, so there's an issue with the survivability of wave devices. The sea has ruined a lot of devices just with storms and the loads they're forced to take. But if you have a port infrastructure that needs to be there already, and you can funnel the waves into the port and put your devices in there, that's an opportunity that we think could make a lot of sense. So yeah, we're really working on a lot of different fronts. I'm really excited about
that's only one on the marine side.
Yeah.
Jamie Murphy, you've been very patient there. Thanks for your patience.
No problem at all.
You're the lead in the Lear Ocean Testing Facility based at MaREI in UCC in Cork. Tell us what Lear and MaREI do in
okay, well, I suppose in the order of it, it's MaREI first, because MaREI is a sort of an SFI supported research centre that works on energy, climate and the blue economy. So it brings together 13 institutions from around Ireland, and it's a sort of a multidisciplinary centre, that it collects all the academic expertise in Ireland related to these topics. Okay, so part of MaREI then is the Lear National Ocean Test Facility. So Lear is the only facility in Ireland that can test offshore technologies at scale. So what we get involved in is the development or the de-risking of technologies prior to them being deployed offshore. So the process of developing a technology for deployment, and when I talk about technologies, it can be a variety of things. We work primarily at the moment on floating wind technologies, because the next phase of development of offshore wind is floating platforms. Say when you go into water depths of greater than 60 meters, you have to go to floating platforms. So the majority of development of offshore wind in Ireland will be floating, because on the east coast we have shallow water, but it's close to shore, and it's going to be hard to put very big turbines, sort of that close to shore. So we have plenty of space in the Celtic Sea and the Atlantic Ocean, but it's deeper water, so we're going to be using floating platforms. So the big push in terms of technology developers at the moment is develop these platforms that you can sit your turbine on, and the idea of these platforms is that they keep the turbine as still as possible. So you want to have something floating in the water that can keep a turbine steady 100 meters above the surface, So that's the challenge being faced at the moment by technology developers. And we test a lot of different types of floating platforms at scale in our test tanks. So we have different test tanks that can test, sort of these technologies. In addition, we test tidal energy technologies. Sort of tidal energy isn't of that great of an interest in Ireland because we don't have a big resource. You need tidal currents, maybe 2.5 meters to be feasible. So it's not great, even though there is some locations that are suitable. But wave energy is the other main area, sort of that could be exploited. And to date, wave energy has suffered because of sort of just because of costs. When you're trying to operate in the water, wind turbine, the technology is out of the water, so you're not dealing with the forces of the water on it. With wave energy, you're sitting in the water, so it's a harder technology to bring to commercialization, and that's why wave energy is lagging behind. So, sort of when a technology isn't commercialized, sort of that's the opportunity for us to do research on it. So we do a lot of research at the moment on floating wind, wave energy, and what's coming in at the moment is floating solar. So there's a lot of work being done on, sort of these platforms that will support large scale solar plants as well. So at the moment there's floating solar in lakes and reservoirs, but now they're talking about putting them out in exposed locations. So we're getting projects coming in looking at them as well. And just to finish then, sort of we also look at other technologies as well. I say, if you can build your technology at scale, we can test it in our tanks. So we've tested coastal structures, in relation to, sort of climate change, and how resilient our coastline will be in the future. And also, ships and vessels as well, sort of we've tested them in our tanks, so we can test a wide gamut of different types of technologies, sort of for use in the marine environment.
Just before I let you go for this minute, Jimmy, and I know everybody tuning in today is a specialist or has a special interest in the marine, but for a layman like myself, will you give me a flavor of just how big these tanks are?
Yeah, so I suppose our largest tank is about 35 meters long, 3 meters deep and 12 meters wide, and it can generate 1.2 meter high waves. So we can test sort of we can test at about 1:30 Atlantic conditions in the tank. So what the idea is to build the model as big as possible, so that you're reducing the gap between the model and the prototype. So I suppose the idea in terms of technology development in Ireland is that we test them first in our tanks in Cork, and then they go to Galway Bay. For instance, then there's a test site in Galway Bay for testing them at quarter scale. And then theoretically after that, they would go to the full scale test site in Belmullet, even though that nothing has gone to Belmullet yet, but that's the overall strategy in Ireland.
If they survive Belmullet, they'll survive anything.
And that's the thing, yeah.
Liam, coming back to you, you're also the lead, or trying to get people together in Marine Ireland Industry Network.
Yep.
What's the benefit? And we've talked about this in other sectors as well. What's the benefit? I think you mentioned 60 firms that are kind of under your wing. What's the benefit of that clustering effect?
Yeah, so one of the things, Vincent, about the marine sector is by definition, it's geographically dispersed. So, you've got a marine engineering capability up in Killybegs, for example, associated with the pelagic fishing industry up there. Brilliant guys, fantastic Irish capability. Very few people actually know about it. You go down to Cork and you've got people like Jimmy and MaREI who are doing their thing down there. We've got people on the East Coast who are looking at the offshore wind opportunity there. So it's by its nature dispersed. And one of the first things we wanted to do with MIN was to bring together that Irish capability so that people began to understand what other people in the sector were doing. And there was potential there to build collaborations between companies. So people began to understand, okay, company A is doing that thing there and company B are doing this thing here. But if we put the two of those things together, that's then a solid market offering. There's a real, there's a real market need for what those two companies can do together. For example, one of the things that happened was that a company required a piece of equipment to allow them to deploy their piece of kit offshore. They needed what's called a launch and recovery system. And they came to us and said, do you have anybody in Maine who could fabricate that for us? And we went to the guys in Killybegs and said, guys, there's an opportunity here. We need somebody who can fabricate for the marine sector for this particular piece of kit. And those two companies work together to develop that piece of kit for that application. So it also helps to keep companies up to date with what's happening in the sector. You know, we hear about if companies, you know, they get a contract or they enter a new market, or, you know, they're acquired by a larger player in the marine sector, whatever it might be. So we have an active news section there. We have an active events section where we can put up any marine events like this one. In fact, it's actually up on the website. We also do, or we did pre-COVID, we do networking get-togethers where we bring companies and people and stakeholders together on site at particular facilities. So we brought a group to Killybegs, brought a group to Galway, brought a group to Cork at one point, and we brought a group to Dunleary. And we will be doing that again next year when we have, you know, we're safe, when we can do that again. Yeah. And there's always a real enthusiasm among the marine sector to get together and to discuss what they're doing. So that's kind of broadly.
Okay, and Tomás, I might come back to you, and this is something you might pick up on maybe when Tomás answers, and please, anybody get in on this particular question, because I think it's an important one that the four of you might have a view on. But I'll come to you, Tomás, first, because you referenced there, you know, whether it was practical or for you to produce a blade or a foil or a turbine that was as big as you said it was. Given the nature of the Irish or the various marine activities around Ireland, is it always going to be the case that we're just going to be providing components really for larger contractors, particularly in areas like offshore wind or hydrogen production down the line?
I think in the immediate term it will be, but it's probably up to us as a country what we decide to do. I mean, there's a lot of onshore wind, and nearly all of the onshore wind is manufactured abroad and imported. I think we're probably in a better position on the wave and the tidal than the wind. I think there's established players already in wind, and it's hard to break into that market. But I think like there aren't any, or at least very, very few commercial wave devices. And even tidal is kind of on the cusp. It's more expensive than wind. The technology works, but the market doesn't match up with it yet. So I think we're probably well positioned to become leaders in that, and we could be integrators. There are a lot of very good companies, engineering companies in Ireland, and like together we could make quite a lot of the components of a tidal turbine if we wanted to.
In offshore, which has huge potential for Ireland down the line, that the big contractors they're scarce in number and they're global in scale. So it's likely our best bet in the short term, as Tomás was saying there, is to get key elements or components into into their needs.
Yeah, I'll happily come in there. So basically the way the offshore wind industry works is that at the top level of the industry are developers, and then a layer below them are tier 2 contractors. So tier 2 contractors typically would be the installers of offshore wind. So we're talking about big Dutch outfits, typically like Van Oord, Boskalis, Demi Offshore. The OEM manufacturers for turbines would be people like Siemens Gamesa and General Electric. So we're not in that space. We have to be realistic. We're not in that space. Where we do have capability is around tier 2. And like I say, we have developed an offshore wind industry cluster there. We have 60 plus Irish companies in that space. Our focus at the moment is to get those companies into the UK industry. And our logic in that is that we have a couple of years yet before the Irish projects in the Irish Sea, the bottom fixed projects in the Irish Sea, begin to kick off. Let's get our guys into the UK industry, who are the world leaders in offshore wind. Let's build our capability there. Let's get them working with the key developers and tier 1s, have them build their capability, cut their teeth in that industry, and then bring that capability back home so that we can maximize the local content in the supply chain for those projects. Wind Energy Ireland last year did a report on the local content capability for Irish projects. And what that report says is that if a wind farm arrived in the morning, we could supply 22% of the supply chain from Irish sources. What they also said is that with a bit of effort, we could push that capability to 30% to 35%, somewhere in that region. Now, to put it in context, the UK, who are the world leaders, remember, in offshore wind, they have 50% local content in the supply chain. So all the big things that you see out at sea, the turbine itself, the tower, the foundation and the transition piece and the blades, most of that is manufactured outside the UK for cost reasons and is brought to the UK for subsequent installation. So 30% would be a significant gain for Ireland Inc. And we can build on that capability, particularly for Irish Sea projects, for the subsequent ones that Jimmy and other people are talking about, you know, the Celtic Sea and the Atlantic in terms of floating offshore wind.
Can I just come in there a second, Vincent, there before?
Yeah, who's that?
Yeah. I suppose, you know, what I see in terms of developing the supply chain is for a pipeline, you know, so there must be a pipeline of projects, you know, before big companies invest in Ireland, before ports invest in improving their infrastructure. We must be certain in terms of where the industry is going in terms of the projects that will be happening. And I suppose we haven't got consented projects yet, so it's hard for people to invest at the moment. You know, so they said in the UK that Siemens didn't invest in a turbine manufacturing plant until there was something like 5 gigawatts of a pipeline ahead of them for manufacturing. And in order to get, you know, a bigger local content, we need certainty in terms of the projects that are going ahead. You know, so we need to get these projects consented as soon as possible.
So there's a role for government in getting that certainty.
Oh, there is, yeah, and they are working hard in trying to get the consenting process sorted out to get these projects, you know, sort of up and running.
Yeah, sorry, if I could jump in, Vincent, just to agree really with what Jimmy said. Like there was a piece yesterday from about DP Energy, which are, you know, they're doing a lot of work on looking at offshore wind, and they were basically saying that the consenting process and the planning process, if that gets held up, we could miss the whole opportunity. And like Ireland does struggle sometimes with planning, and it. I think Liam said it already, the East Coast, the turbines will be big enough, you're going to be able to see them from Dublin or from wherever you are. So the West Coast is probably longer time frame away, but if you're going for floating wind, you can go out further, the wind is better, it's stronger, but you need an infrastructure to take that electricity back. And I think Eddie O'Connor is doing some work on that in Supernode to be able to transmit electricity possibly from Ireland to France or to the UK. But the consenting is really, really important, and the processes. And without that, like we'll only be doing the first part of what Liam said, like our suppliers going to the UK because the market might not get here. And it needs to happen really quick.
I think a company that Jimmy knows, Devon and Doherty, I had them on News Talk during the week making the exact same point, and they're in that engineering space as well. John Murphy of 8 West, you've been sitting there quietly and patiently. A question we've got in here from one of our attendees. Your software product, and I know you do a whole range of software services for a range of industries, but your software product in the broad marine area is in search and rescue. Do you see potential for other software products or solutions within the broad marine area?
Yeah, I do. Our market is international. It always has been international, and finding the market, you know, what we've done is that we've partnered with a lot of organizations abroad. Certainly, we've been very busy in the Netherlands, and I don't think necessarily it was a Brexit issue, but when you're looking for maybe like-minded individuals internationally and like-minded economies and those that are kind of commercially driven for looking solutions in the marine. 2 countries really stand out in Europe, which would be Norway and the Netherlands, where they have, where organizations that we're working with have C-level executives that are looking to invest in new technology, solving problems, whether, you know, certainly within our own space, within the search and rescue and marine space. You know, COVID really disrupted things. Traditionally, there's been a drop in boat ownership, for example. Leisure boat ownership has been declining over the years. One of the main reasons for that is that it's quite difficult to learn how to sail straightly and properly and all that, and younger individuals weren't necessarily interested in that. But a growth then in kiting, windsurfing, foiling, which tend to have, you know, probably in the higher side of fatalities. There's, you know, more people are going out to sea when others are coming in. So that's certainly from surf skiing and windsurfing and foiling, and these tend to be very difficult people to find when they get into trouble. So you know, we in our company kind of identified that through our partner agencies and police organizations around Europe, and even working with the Royal Danish Navy. and coming up with a technology that would look to address that. And that's what we did with Sony. But a lot of it really has, you know, we're relatively, well, we're established for over 20 years in Cork, but still being the SME kind of side of things. But I think partnering with other organizations in Europe helps to kind of identify what these new markets are. And we moved rapidly then from developing the software solution here in Ireland and deploying it and testing it and getting our first customers in Europe. That's
so there are export opportunities for firms like your own, servicing not just the broader industrial marine sector, but also the recreational sector.
Absolutely. So we have our first both recreational and as in consumer clients, and we've got companies that have purchased our solution as well. So, you know, we're receiving orders in this morning just from Australia. So it is a kind of a universal need, and it's been able to, you know, engage with the organizations that we've worked with the last couple of years, with the Coast Guard, our naval organizations, our search and rescue organizations, using the credibility that we built. You know, the Safe Tracks Maritime platform last year, you know, rescued or assisted 1,000 people. Even just over the summer, there were 60 SOS messages received through our apps in the Netherlands out of, you know, I think about 400 assistance missions. So, you know, Irish software, I think, has got a lot of credibility around the world, certainly within that the maritime sector as well. I see huge areas for growth in that, whether it's in the leisure sector or in the B2B or enterprise sector as well. So there are good opportunities, and large organizations, whether it be Dell or Sony, are looking for partner companies that are you know, I was going to say small, but I don't mean small, but I mean fast moving.
Nimble.
Companies that can use their technology and employ it then to address you know, big needs that are out there today, certainly for in our area in health and safety and tracking.
Okay, that's a very interesting mention there. Jimmy Murphy of MaREI and Lear, if companies or individuals, but more likely companies, have ideas or they have products that they, even at the conceptual level yet, that they need to test either conceptually or in your tanks or whatever, what way does that work? Do they approach you? Do you jointly part fund the work that's involved? How does that work?
Well, I suppose there's various mechanisms by which people can come in and engage with us. I suppose we have sort of business development managers in MaREI, you know, so there's Liam Fitzgerald and there's Gillian Bruton, you know, who people can contact directly. But generally, people may come directly to the facility themselves, you know, so we would then sort of try and determine what's the best mode of interaction, you know, so they can come in and we can do either research or testing based on a commercial basis where they pay for it, or else they can sort of be co-funded through the MaREI support or through the SFI support, whereby, you know, sort of the, you know, some portion of the costs are paid. There are also other mechanisms as well, you know, sort of there are various calls that people can get free testing to the labs or free access to the labs to do testing. For instance, SEAI recently have funded a call for applications whereby they support a number of developers to test their technologies in our tanks, you know. So there are various mechanisms, you know. The best thing if somebody has an idea or a technology, no matter how early it is, to try and engage with us, and we will help them any way we can, because that's what we want to do. We want to see Irish technologies get out into the water.
And this brings you, and I'm just conscious of the time, lads, this brings me perhaps back to you, Liam, just to pick up on what Jimmy was saying there about MaREI and the collaborative and funding possibilities there. Broadly speaking, are the funding opportunities available to research, innovation, product development in the marine sector the same as for other areas?
They absolutely are, yeah, Vincent. You know, and we'd have a whole suite of support mechanisms depending on the stage of a company and what we felt was the most relevant support a company needed, you know, and we'd encourage companies to come and talk to us about that. You know, if it's an early stage company, they might be a good fit with our HPSU program, for example. One thing I would say is that if you have a land-based technology, and Jimmy alluded to this earlier, and you want to marinize it, you want to see, does it have an application in the marine sector? You really need to have it, you know, properly developed and tested in a marine environment, because the marine sector is utterly unforgiving of land-based technologies that are put in the sea and almost immediately fail. So John will have long experience there of developing their technologies and making them suitable for use in the marine sector. It's a very harsh environment out there, and products need to be able to stand up to the marine environment. We do actually have really good cooperation as well from other players in the marine sector in Ireland to test, new innovative technologies. So the Navy, for example, are very helpful around taking equipment onto their vessels for testing. Irish Lights have the Grania Whale and Navigation Boys, and they've provided platforms for people to test equipment, as have the Marine Institute, using their research vessels. So there's lots of opportunities there for people to develop products and develop them appropriately for the marine sector.
And of course, you have other technology sectors that can help in this area apart from MaREI as well. I think in terms of perhaps data, Cedar, whom we've talked
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And we would have research centers like Cedar who would have that capability around IoT and data acquisition, data analysis, but also things like machine learning. So one of the really strong companies we have in the marine sector is a company called Cathix Ocean, who do a subsea pipeline inspection technology using machine learning. So they've taught the machine to look at a piece of subsea pipeline and go, this is a normal piece of pipeline. If you see anything other than that, you let the human operator know that there's something wrong. So the machine can move very quickly along the pipeline. Normal piece of pipe, normal piece of pipe, normal piece of pipe. Hang on, there's something I don't recognize as normal piece of pipe. And it will refer that back then to the human operator and say, you need to look at this piece of pipe because that's something I don't recognize as a normal piece of pipe. And that was a revolutionary a disruptive technology for subsea pipeline inspection developed by a company in Naas.
Okay. Oh, my own county. Well, we're a very proud maritime county there. and Liam, before Siobhan, I'm going to hand back to Siobhan in a minute, but before Siobhan marinizes both of us, you better mention that all funding opportunities and possibilities are in the Knowledge Transfer Ireland funding directory.
They are. So we'd encourage people to have a look at the KTI website, and they can see there the various funding mechanisms that we have available. But do please as well come and talk to us. We don't bite. Anybody who's on the call here will be happy to have a conversation with you around the marine sector and opportunities that might be there and might exist. All to the benefit of Ireland Inc.
Of course. Well, as a landlubber from Kildare, lads, it's a pleasure and very instructive and informative to talk to you all about what's happening in the marine sector generally, particularly the potential for renewable energy off our west coast and the technologies and everything that will be required from that at every level. But for the moment, before I hand back to Siobhan, Liam Curran of Enterprise Ireland, Tomás Flangan from ÉireComposites, John Murphy from 8 West, and Jimmy Murphy from the Lear Ocean Testing Facility in MaREI in Cork. Thank you all for joining us this morning. Siobhan, I hope you're there.
And thanks, Liam. You did steal my line, but just to make everyone aware that there are a lot of supports available through the knowledgetransferireland.com website. So we do have a list of all the research infrastructure in Ireland and contact details of the most relevant people. So that will include supports such as MaREI, such as Cedar that Liam has mentioned, and any funding supports for RD&I activity in Ireland as well. So I really want to thank all our panelists today for a really interesting discussion. And, like we were saying, if you have any questions after this event, please do feel free to get in touch. We'll be sending around information on some of the sports listed this morning as well. So thank you to everyone for your attention and joining us this morning. Our next webinar is going to be on the 7th of December, where we're going to be looking back on the strange year that was 2021 and reviewing developments in the KT system. So we hope you can join us then. And then also, we will be asking for your feedback after this event. And it's also a great opportunity to help us shape the content for next year. So if there is anything related to knowledge transfer that you want us to provide more information about, do feel free to get in touch. So thank you for your attention this morning, and thank you to everyone that has presented to us. We hope you have a great day, and we'll see you next month.
Thanks,
Okay,
bye. Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.